Hey, good night, everybody. Good night, everybody. How about
He's
hello,
ended before
everybody?
we start.
Yeah, I'm getting used to it, but I couldn't say I'm getting used to the time change, but that wouldn't
No, we're at the same time.
Welcome, everybody, to actually our first webinar of 2013.
Oh, is it? It's our
Yeah.
first webcast of 2013. Wow,
Yeah.
time flies.
You know, it's cool. This is our third year of presenting these webinars, and thanks to everybody that came out tonight to join us. Really glad. It's just because you guys are supporting us, so we get to continue to do these. And welcome. Thank you very much for coming out.
Thanks for coming out. I'm G. Trulia, the president of the TST, and we got Pierre Rispo behind the camera, and we've used some of his expertise as we're going to tonight. And I'd like to thank Motor Age for being here for 3 years. Pleasure working with Pete, and of course.
Hey, gotta give the props to our sponsor.
That's right.
You know, tonight's seminar is hosted by Wagner Thermoquiet brake pads. They have a new one now, ceramic NXT. We'll give you some more information on that towards the end of the webinar. Certainly not an infomercial, but you know, I don't know if you guys knew that Wagner is part of the federal-mogul family of products. Of course, that's Carter, which helped us out.
Yeah, we've done the Carter. That's right.
Fuel pump, Moog, chassis parts.
But he worked for Moog for years.
So I mean, yeah, and it's. I think that's one of the things that really excites me about this process over the last 3 years. You know, the companies that have come along to sponsor us, federal-mogul and the others, these guys are major players.
Oh yeah.
You know, federal-mogul is, you know, not only is Wagner a leading brand in the aftermarket for braking products, but they're also a leader globally fitting OEM.
Yeah.
You know, literally the brakes that your car came with.
Which is very important when you guys are dealing with the squeaks, the noise, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and that's really what we're going to try to tackle tonight, the comebacks, the complaints that you get from customers after you do a brake job. You know, one of the leading complaints is noise.
No doubt, Pete. I mean, you know, running a shop for years, I would get people, and I tried all different brake pads, different rotors, and sometimes it was something you weren't doing just right. I mean, Volvos, I used to do a lot of them, and they were real quirky. And, you know, that's what we're going to cover. Some of these things, whether it's cutting the rotor, whether it's replacing the rotor, you know, using a good quality part. There's a lot of cheap stuff out there that people go with.
Right.
And that is an issue.
Right. Pulsation, another very common complaint.
You know, especially when someone heats those brakes up, goes through a puddle, you know, they get the little pumping. They're doing a little free exercise there. That's all.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things we're going to share with you guys tonight is that you can set that up in your own repair process. You know, it may not be happening tomorrow or next week,
Right.
but you can set up the conditions that will create that problem, and then you end up with a comeback you could have avoided. So we're going to share some ways to avoid that. And then, of course, you get the ones where they complain about the feel, the stopping ability doesn't feel the same as it did. You know, we're going to talk about that too.
And some of the pitfalls there, Pete. Some people, when they do a brake job, they're pushing the piston in, and they didn't open a bleeder, and or when they do that, they don't bleed the other wheels, and sometimes you get that spongy pedal.
Right.
And that is a different feel. And besides, different brake material. If you're using the wrong brake material, the wrong rotors, glazed rotors.
Yeah. And we, of course, the federal-mogul tech folks have been very open with us, sharing a lot of good information.
Yeah.
And not information unique to Wagner. I'll put that right out there. I've talked to other, you know, major manufacturers, as you have, and,
Sure.
and a lot of the things that we're going to show you are a common thread from all of them. And all of them tell us that the complaints that they get blaming their product for causing the squeal, the pulsation, and failure is really none of the kind. It all boils down to doing the job right the first time around, checking those things that are going to create those problems the first time around.
That is super important. I can't emphasize that enough.
And
So-
the newer tolerances. I mean, new cars are not as forgiving as the ones you and I grew up with. So,
And, you know, is your brake lathe, whether it be on car or, you know, a standard bench type, is it really good?
right.
You know, a lot of these things have been beaten up, and I see people cut them and the finish is not right, or it wobbled so much, they didn't cut it correctly, took too much off one side. There's a lot of different things that we'll go over, and we'll be actually doing a brake job. I'm going to get my hands dirty.
Yeah. So
he has pink gloves, though.
Yeah.
So the purple gloves, don't worry about it.
Let's move over towards the car here for a minute. I want to grab a couple of things.
Yeah, okay.
Really bad.
So here we can see we have a rotor that's pretty beat up. I mean, I've seen a lot worse, but you can see there's a lot of hot spots on it. And you can see we already have taken washers and put it on here so we can hold this rotor on, so we can measure it easy, we can do run out easily, and we have obviously done that prior to showing you how we took the wheel off. You don't want to really see that.
Before we get real deep, guys, too, let me a reminder, this is live. Things happen when they're live, so kind of bear with us.
Really?
Never happened to us, right? And number two, if you have a question, comment, Pierre's keeping an eye on the chat channel, so just type it in, and we'll answer them as we go along.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pierre, if you see anything, just let us know.
Will do.
He's kind of doing double duty for us, and we appreciate Pierre taking the time to help us out, as we do all the guys at TST who help us make this happen. One of the things we haven't talked about yet, I do want to kind of mention really quick, brake fluid.
Oh, brake fluid, big.
Recently did a lot of research on that, and I got a video on YouTube, and then the Auto Pro workshop on brake fluid testing. You know, I know you agree with me. I have no problem selling a brake flush to a customer if it's needed.
Exactly.
It's not. I'm not looking to flush his wallet. You know, I'm looking to help him take care of his car.
Exactly.
And a lot of guys go by the rule that if I'm doing a brake job, I should do a brake flush. Well, what if the guy just had that done 6 months prior?
Right, just a waste of money.
He doesn't need it.
I mean, you know, maybe cracking the bleeders open to get some little air out, but not flushing everything out.
Right, and
That's the
you
difference.
can't tell by the fluid color.
Oh, no.
Okay. So here's a couple of things on that for you. Moisture used to be the issue.
Oh, it's big.
Okay.
Pete, I believe that hydroscopic, that the brake fluid was, pulling moisture in was the big problem. Until I seen some reports, and you and I had discussed this today,
Right.
you came up with the same thing. It's not the moisture.
Yeah, they've made the systems a lot tighter. Moisture intrusion is not the issue it was even 10, 15 years ago.
Totally different system.
But what is the issue is something that it shares with coolants. There's an inhibitor
That breaks down.
in that fluid to help protect the internal components from corrosion. And that doesn't last forever, just like it doesn't last forever in the coolant. Now, when that starts to break down, now moisture can become an issue because it takes very little when that inhibitor package isn't where it's supposed to be to start that corrosive process.
You know, the other thing we learned when we visited another company that fluids is not all brake fluid that's being sold out there is equal.
Yeah.
You know, when you get this white bottle type of thing or a cheapie, a deal is not a deal. You know, good .3 or .4 fluid is going to cost you some money. Look at the boiling point is the important thing. And be careful of silicone fluid only in systems that would call for it.
Right.
And there's,
Right.
you know, a few of those, of course, motorcycles. And
Yeah.
there are applications for it, but use the right brake fluid.
Absolutely. So what I do want you to do, though, whether you're checking as part of your normal under hood check or you're doing it as part of the brake service, here's probably the easiest way to do it. These are brake strips. They're test strips. So we're going to pop that puppy open.
And these brake strips, here, I'll hold you this little thing here. These brake strips, by the way, are real good to show your customer because, you know, you're giving them the visual of where this brake fluid is at.
And what this strip is testing is not moisture, though. It's testing the health of the inhibitor package, and what is the trigger, I guess you could call it, is the amount of copper that
That's
starts
the
to
big
show
one.
up in the brake. I've actually seen some cars where the fluid had a greenish tinge to it because they were so heavily loaded with copper.
That's correct.
Don't want to wait for it to get that bad. This is actually part of the motorist assurance program.
Yep,
It has the spec.
That is correct.
No more than 200 parts per million. It's very simple. You just dip it in the fluid.
And let's face it, guys, this is a moneymaker. I know you're probably saying, what the hell are they talking about brake fluid? The reason why we're talking about brake fluid, it's important and it's something that you should be testing.
Yeah.
For years, I used a old tester that will show you a newer style one that I put into brake fluid, and I would check it out. Whether it was a Honda or any other company that recommend flushing, if it wasn't bad, I wasn't going to flush it.
No,
I would
great.
just open the bleeders up.
Great example. I was over at the local shop that I do some filming up at home, and I found that I tested all the cars that he had in his base, including mine. Now mine was an '07 Corolla. It's got 76,000 miles on it, and there was no problem, either moisture or copper content with my brake fluid. A few other cars in the shop though, some tested very high on moisture, okay on copper. Some tested really high on copper, okay on moisture. You know, so I guess the main thing is the health of that inhibitor package, just like we stressed with the Corollas.
And probably a nice idea to go check some of your new fluids as well to see what quality they are.
Yeah. Anyway, here's another way you can do it. This is a OTC product. It's a brake fluid. They call it a safety meter. What this tool does is you hook it up to the battery, and you can take a sample of fluid out into a little cup, place this in, it heats the fluid, actually measures the boiling temperature of the fluid. But that's a relation to moisture content.
Right. Now, I bet there's people out there with Pierre looks that are saying, how about using my digital voltometer? Not as accurate. And
I've seen that too. You know, it's kind of like checking in the coolant.
Exactly.
What's causing it? You know,
precisely.
Is it a ground? You know, we won't even get that far into it. We'll give you this wrap up. Go to, I guess it's brake strip. It's part of the Phoenix system. I can't remember what the actual web address was. I forget that.
Well, Phoenix System is one of them.
That's easy. Brakebleeder.com.
Brakebleeder.com.
And you can get information on those strips, probably on the tool truck, and probably at your local parts house.
Yeah, quite a few.
I have a couple of questions.
Oh, sure, Pierre. Questions
From Mike. So we should not recommend a brake flush with 3% or greater moisture, was the question?
Certainly, if you can test by moisture and you have excessive, absolutely. Okay, but what I'm going to tell you is that you're going to find, here's the deal. If the inhibitor package is okay, there's no corrosion taking place, and the SAE reports that I read said up to 5% moisture content and still be okay. Okay, that's a fine reason for changing it. I won't argue that point. But you can have as little as 0.5% of moisture and a low inhibitor package and have corrosion problems. And that's one of the leading causes of damage to the ABS hydraulic control units. Those are not cheap parts.
And by the way, that's, using the good fluid and testing it correctly, you won't have to change an ABS controller, which is expensive.
Yeah, I mean,
those solenoids and dump valves and everything that are in there.
I think you will find more cause based on the copper content than you will on the moisture content, because the vehicles today are just sealed that much.
And again, I thought the same way up until probably about 8 years ago when that report, was presented to me, and I was like, wow. Another question, Pierre?
Another question from Brian. Where do you find the brake test strips, or the brake fluid test strips?
What was the name of that website again?
If you want to find it out, it's through the Phoenix Injector Company. Brakebleeder.com is one source.
And there's other ones out there. I don't know off the top of my head. There's quite a few different companies.
Just make sure it tests copper.
Right. Not just moisture. But some of them, if you just do a little spit test on them,
in Florida, I can leave a test strip out for moisture sitting on my workbench, and it's going to change color.
Exactly. And that's really not the best way to test it. Any other questions, Pierre?
That's it for now.
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and start now on the brake job. We talked about the brake fluid. We already have the wheel off, but prior to that, the first thing I want you guys to make a habit of doing, as you should be doing anyway, I'm sure most of you are, is check the wheel for any play. Is there any indication there's a problem with the bearing? Because if we've got a loose bearing, whether it's a tapered or hub type bearing, that's going to impact the brakes.
Exactly.
That could be one of those factors that sets it up for pulsation down the road.
Right. Okay. And the next thing is, how's our hub?
Sure. Yeah.
Is the hub good, bad? I mean, people forget to make sure that the brake rotor and hub are really clean together. That's an issue. Brake mounting parts is another one.
That's a great point, and I want to go ahead and stress that. I'm going to make sure we have everything kind of loose here.
And the
first thing I want to do, I got my usual seat maker. Right, look at this on. A lot of times you get that little wear ridge right at the edge of the rotor, and I don't want to make it any harder than necessary
to get it off.
To get the caliper off. Now I've seen some guys, and I've been guilty of this, like stick a big old screwdriver in here and yank it all the way over.
Play the yank.
Okay. And that in itself is not a bad thing, but what you're doing or what you want to do while you're squeezing this closed is get a feel for how smooth the piston is to retract.
And that is important. The other thing we'd like to also mention is the bleeder valve, which, you know, can you hold that here? The bleeder valve needs to be opened up, so rather than pushing the dirty fluid back to the master cylinder or ABS control unit or wherever, okay, that you let it come out. We already have a pan under here suitable. And the other thing is, well, we know bleeders are hard to open up. Well, when someone comes in for an oil change, what I used to do is I'd spray bleeders up all the time, okay? The other thing is, you gotta be careful, obviously. I use a 1/4-inch little ratchet set with a very small ratchet, and I break open that bleeder with a 6-point socket. Because when people put a wrench on it and they strip the hell out of it, it makes it real tough. Now, there are a couple of kits out there that actually can help you remove, and I like this part, by the way. He's doing all the work. I'm just doing the yakking. How easy is this? At any rate, it's very important that you have some of these other kits that help you get bleeders out that are stuck. Sometimes heating it, you don't want to boil anything. That's usually frowned upon.
Yeah,
but the real world is, you got to be careful doing it, but the real world is sometimes some penetrating oil with a little heat, and bingo. You remember, you don't want to heat the bleeder up, you want to heat around it up a bit. And that kind of breaks the rust, tighten it, loosen it, and sometimes the tool, what's the impact?
Yes, the impact, yeah.
I couldn't think of it.
So, we only order to push that piston in just enough to lift it off. Okay, there's a good reason for that. First, I want to see how that feels. Does it move smoothly? Okay, or does it take a lot of effort? But number two, when I get it off, I want to take a look at one of the most commonest items, the boot. And I don't know if you can see that.
You got a little flashlight on your pair?
Here, can zoom in on that.
I knew he had this very expensive flashlight. That he's not
But
getting
guess what
back
we
on that.
found on G's Ride?
Look at that. The boot got caught up. Can you get that?
I have it.
Okay,
So-
now if I just went ahead and collapsed the piston all the way in, I would not have seen that.
No way.
Okay, and what's that going to allow? Now this is one of a phenolic piston, but the bore is not phenolic.
Right.
So that's allowing moisture, debris, contamination into that bore, which could end up damaging the seal.
Yeah. It's a good idea to take
and
it
it can-
off and rebuild it.
And it can jam the piston real bad.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
there's-
I'll have Pete stay up here in New York rather than go back to Florida. He'll be doing the pistons.
Okay, also, I want to catch up to point of attention, and this used to irk me to no end.
Oh, I
Almost
know where
every
you're going.
shop I worked in, I would see guys just let the calipers hang by their hoses. You know, I always got my uniforms on those wire coat hangers. It was never a problem getting enough to make something
Bend
to
them
hang
2,
the
3
calipers
and
on.
hang it.
Something like here, like you got this piece of rod that we could hang and support the weight of the caliper, not the hose. You can damage the hose.
And people don't realize that. You know, the hose, this piston comes out obviously with pressure,
Sure.
but it releases itself if the line is not kinked up. And once you hang it and crimp it, internally, you'll run into a problem.
Right, and a lot of the same as like the retraction you're talking about, this piston seal
Correct.
is also part of that action. So
No
if you
doubt.
damage that seal, you're not going to get that full release.
Exactly. And with this dust boot having a hole in it, the seal is down in there, sometimes a quarter of a way in or a bit, and it's going to start getting old debris in there, and there's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Now at this point, you know, once I've done that inspection, I would go ahead, open up the bleeder screed like you said, and then I could put the
Push
piston
the
the rest of
piston
the way
all
in.
the way.
Now we're not gonna do that tonight because you know we have some other things we want to take attention to. That would be the next step I would take with the caliper. In addition to that, I want to get all this clean. If there's anything here on the surfaces where the pads are going to meet, I want all that cleaned off. And that's part of the putting it back together process.
That's, you know, wire brushing it, cleaning it down, whatever,
Okay.
whatever someone uses on it.
Next thing to do, we're going to take the pads out and inspect them for their wear. Not a bad idea to mark the inners and outers, so you put them back in the same place. Some are unique.
Well, especially, you know, where sensors go. Some people have sensors upside down. So,
And some of these are replaceable. You know,
Mhm.
this is actually melted pad, but you know, these are replaceable. There's hardware for that.
and also, you get something like a BMW or Mercedes or Audi, they have little sensors on there, headlight sensors, I'll get that
Yes.
out.
Yeah,
Headlight
pad wear.
sensors, pad wear sensors.
And on some models, either the inner or the outer pad is directional. It's
Yes.
labeled as a right or a left.
That's right.
Yes.
And that's something to look for when you get the box. I always say play the matchup game even when you get a set of pads.
Well,
Make
you know
sure
me,
everything
it's
looks
like,
good.
it's, you have a service information system for a reason. And we've said this a million times,
Let me take care of that.
all the rules of thumb that we grew up on, you know, with the old days, I mean, with the carburetors and points, you could do that, but today's cars, the tolerances are specific, the way things are put together is very specific,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
model to model, make to make. You've got to look at the service information system so you don't make what otherwise would be a simple mistake.
No doubt, you know, that's what old data is for. Go in and get the spec out.
Now, we're going to remove the caliper mount.
And of course, we loosen this up. You know how
No, that's
hard it
fine.
is.
Wait a minute, go.
He's very strong. I used my Ingersoll air ratchet that doesn't bust your hands up, by the way. And we loosened this up earlier.
But again, I got to ask, for you guys who are watching, how many of you replace the guides? Okay. How many of you remove the guide pins, check the position of the bushings, clean them up? This is all part of doing the brake job. Why? This has to be able to, the stomach has to be able to move
That's
freely.
what's called a floating caliper.
Right? So
It has to be able to float, move.
And if you do feel like there's a little excessive play, you know, don't like, well, that's not a problem. Just
New pins. They have a pin package.
A pin kit.
Well, look at this.
you know, we
We'll
can
hold
get
whatever you want.
we can get the parts, you know,
So-
to rebuild that.
There's the pins, and there's the boots. So they do sell these, you know, and if your parts store doesn't carry them, you got to ask them to carry. By the way, you can make yourself a few extra bucks and do the job right the first time, rather than having some pad wear
Right.
or some noise because we can't move back and forth correctly.
I'd like to make a comment about the sliders on Euro cars. A lot of people assume that the amount of drag on the pins in those rubber bushings that are in those floating calipers, that's all right, and it is not. The bushings are not actually worn out a lot of times in our rust belty type of area. Rust forms behind the bushing and squeezes it. And then it gets tighter and tighter and the caliper won't return. You end up with one pad that wears much faster than the other.
Right.
Why don't you take a look, Pierre, and see if there's any questions, and thank you
Yep.
for that good tip.
And while Pierre's checking those out, I don't know about up here. I know we have a chain down where I'm at that advertises all the time the
Oh,
99,
please.
95 brake job. All
59,
four corners.
Oh.
All four
All for
corners.
$99. Okay, we got the
Okay.
$59.95
Of
stuff.
course, I know you're a shop owner. You own multiple shops.
Yep.
You know, Pierre was a business owner. A lot of you guys who are watching are business owners. You know, there's no way. You can't do that. You can't pay a tech his time. You can't buy the quality
No.
component.
No
That's
way.
where, and I know that's what you guys battle against. Because I had to fight that argument with the guys that I was in the shop with.
It was
I
so
want a
bad.
hardware kit. Why do you want to spend that money?
Right.
You know, well, do you want your brake job to last, or do you want it to last half?
Right.
And they should be selling it accordingly.
Yeah,
Yes.
and in the state of California, they had problems with those cheap brake jobs, and they don't allow them now to advertise the low price. And that's pretty good, because we need to do the job right. We're professionals after all.
I have a few questions and
okay.
comments.
Okay.
Rob says, if you can open the bleed screw, would you recommend clamping off the hose to prevent fluid
Okay,
loss?
let me stop you there. Someone mentioned if you could open the bleeder, clamping off the hose, that's a no-no. To me, that's just as bad as hanging it.
Yeah.
Now, again, you think because it looks like it's rubber, it's not. Inside is a diameter
Nitrile,
that's
see?
nitrile, yeah, and if you crush it, it doesn't always go back, and that piston is going to be a problem. So please don't do that anymore if you've been doing it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with, you know, once you open it, let it drip a little bit. You can see the color of the fluid if anything's coming out. Just lock it up. And I always keep my little small snap-on ratchet 1/4 inch and, you know, whether it's 3/8 or an 8mm or whatever, lock it back up. And again, hang it like we have it. Don't hang it by the hose.
Rocky made a comment. He said, I keep 4 short bungee cords on top of my toolbox. Hang 'em.
We have those too. The rubber bungee cords
That's
work
right.
well.
Very good. For
You know,
that
even
and other things.
Yeah, axles, whatever. It really helps. Great tip there, Rocky. Thank you. Bungee cords.
Guy John said, I thought when a dust boot was torn, it was required to be replaced.
He thought when the boot, in case you can't hear Pierre doesn't have a mic, he thought when the dust boot was ripped, it's required to be replaced. Well, in my shop it was.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd rebuild pistons. Of course, nowadays I think it's always cheaper to get them, but they're not hard to rebuild. Even if you take the bleeder out and put grease through there to pop the piston out on some of the hard ones, you hone it, I have the hone, put it all in, get a new piston and the
Well,
kit.
you know, I think the days of rebuilding calipers and stuff, because we did it all the time way back when, but
constantly.
now it's something we just give me a set.
Right, and just match them up. And I'm going to give you a good tip that happened. You know, bleeders, watch where they're located. Most of the time the bleeder is going to be on top so the air can get out. There was a shop that actually was going crazy, replaced everything on the car, and all I did when I put it up in the air and said to him, dude, come here. The bleeders were on the bottom. Now some Volvos and stuff had 4 bleeders on split calipers, but again, they'd have a bleed procedure. You don't want to put things the wrong way.
Yeah, and you know, and thank God for those in our business who helped us make some money. But anyway,
Yeah,
All right,
we'd rather do it right the first time.
yes.
That's what we're here about.
That's
Trying to
right.
help you.
John had a question, how to deal with rust in the pin cavity on those calipers.
Okay,
you
so
talking about the guide pins?
The guide pins in the pin, I think what he's talking about is when I said the rubber boots get rust and it constricts them. I had a procedure for that where I would, obviously you take the rubber boot, the pin slider thing off and throw it away, get new ones. Then I would clean it out with old-fashioned brake cylinder hone tool that
Sure.
they
Oh,
still have somewhere.
oh, I have them right in my box.
You can get a variety of bottle brush size hones.
Yeah.
And then
to use.
additionally, to keep it from rusting, I would spray it with a little primer, rust-stopping primer.
Good tip.
Yeah, good tip. So again, the question is to get in there and clean out those caliper guides. It depends on the design you're dealing with.
Oh, yeah.
But you could get little bottle hones. You know, I used to take like emery paper,
Yeah.
a piece of fuel line, and you split one side of the fuel line and wrap the paper around
Right,
it,
and then
stick
give
it in your drill, and that was your homemade home. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. If you guys, and that's the hard part for me because I've been out of the Rust Belt for a long time. We don't have quite that.
We're
kind of
still
issue.
here.
that we do it that you guys do. We don't have that so much in Florida.
He has the shiny, nice weather down there. All sunny and shiny.
So let me stress that first of all, one of the most common reasons that you're going to get pulsation complaints developing, noise complaints developing, is not taking the time to make sure that those caliper mounts, those guides are working and are the way they should be.
Yeah, and Pete, really, how long does it take, guys? It doesn't take a long time to do it. And it's additional money, right? Additional money that you could make because there's a markup on all these parts and you're doing it right. That way the customer comes back no time only to get extra work.
One last, and repeat the question because
Sure.
some people can't hear me.
Yeah.
What type of lubricant do you use on the bushings?
What type of lubricant do you use on the bushings, Mr. Pete?
Well, I kind of got a little ahead of that because we're going to show that during the reassembly process. But we'll go ahead and say best is the silicone high temp.
Right.
That's what most manufacturers
Silicone.
recommend.
Yeah.
And then we
We have it here
another-
somewhere.
Another type. This is a synthetic moly.
Yeah.
That, you know that you can use.
Yeah.
So
So whatever.
this is good for the caliper guides and any of the sliding contacts that you have to lubricate.
And backing plates, that one does as well.
Yes, I used we're talking about drum brakes. Guys.
Drum brake. So
If you look carefully when you have the shoes off, you see 3 little metal tabs, if you call them that, little
Right.
rise spots.
and
in the
don't
shoe.
forget the anchors and the pivot pin at
Right.
the bottom.
And a lot of brake squeal in the drums is because those contacts are not lubricated.
Right. When you see a groove in them, well, no one has done anything on that backing plate. They didn't lubricate it. and it will wear a groove right into it.
Yeah. You ever replace a backing plate because of a drum brake issue?
Yeah.
But that's it.
Another question, Pierre?
Stephanie asked, what if the bleeders are stuck and you can't get them out without breaking them?
Well, there's a couple of different methods. First of all, again, we went over this before, a 6-point socket only.
Repeat the
No,
question.
no, someone asked the question, thank you, Pierre. If you can't get the bleeders out, what do? Well, I always use a 6-point socket, okay? Lubricant, very, very important. And sometimes, you know, even a little heat, and, like we said before, the impact hammer. So your little impact thing, you bang it, a lot of times it's rusted. Now, if you can heat them up, and believe me, we get a lot up here. I've done even brake lines. When you have your brake line over here that comes up to the block, and you have to loosen it up, I spray this stuff up with penetrating oil ahead of time. And always use the method of try to go tight, loose, a little heat, little tapping. Sometimes even the socket on there, give it a couple of good shots with the hammer, break some stuff loose. And we have a couple of kits here. I don't know who makes them. Could be Mac or Snap-on or someone, whoever sells them. They are specific to getting bleeders out that are broken or whatever. They even make different tools where you can rethread them and stuff in different sizes.
Yeah.
So you may want to look into that. I'm sure there's a lot of resources from your Snap-on, Mac, Maco, and all those guys.
Okay.
We had a comment and another question.
Okay,
We have one more
comment?
question.
What are you doing, question
The
or
comment was the small ball hones. They have metric size ball hones for those boards.
Metric size ball hones was one of the comments, so yeah, that'll do it.
And the other one was, if a hose has been twisted and you found it on your visual inspection, should you replace the hose?
I would say
Well,
yes.
let's repeat it. On a
yeah,
visual
sorry.
inspection,
Keep forgetting.
a hose has been twisted. Pete said he would replace the hose. I'd go with him. Remember, you got a 3,000-pound gun here. You got to be able to stop this thing.
Yeah, the car doesn't run, it ain't gonna hurt anybody.
Right. But when you can't stop,
That's a
I
problem.
don't know about you, but I like, pedal to the metal sometimes. I want to make sure my vehicles are able to stop.
And I really hate to mention this, but it's the fact that the world that we live in is called CYA, guys. You know, I would rather err on the side of safety, so I don't get a call from a lawyer down the road, whether it was my fault or not, taking everything I've worked so hard for. Right. You know, so
Yeah, you
err
have a
on the side of safety.
responsibility as a mechanic, technician. You know, when you work on someone's car, people come in and they trust us in telling them what's wrong.
Right.
Now, believe me, I know we got a place right down the street, 5995. They advertise on the radio. You know, we're in the New York City area. They advertise they're sponsors of a major team and all that stuff. Well, guess what? You don't get out of there for that. And they throw a lot of parts at the car, and companies that do stuff like that, cheap pricing, your customer is not going to get away with the $59.95. Very few get out the door.
Right.
You explain to your customer, when I ran my shop years back, we can't get into prices, but I was hired as a dealer, and I would tell them, look, you're getting the best quality parts, whether I have to get them from our sponsor here, Federal-Mogul Wagner, and I did use some of those as well as other brands, or OE. A lot of times I had a particular problem with a Mercedes or whatever, I'd have to buy dealer. But the job was done right.
Right.
Because again, it's an important function of the vehicle to stop.
Sure. Sure. And again, you don't want them coming back 2 months, 3 months down the road. Now I got a pulsation. Now I got a noise.
And you don't get paid for it.
Right.
And there's a lot of cheap parts out there. Another question?
Two comments, two tricks. One guy Jerry uses brake fluid in the threads and a little heat to help loosen it up.
This is the bleeder.
The bleeder.
The bleeder, brake fluid in the thread, and he heats it up a little bit.
Right.
And by the way, you know, there's a lot of these little, we always keep around one of those little...
vacuum.
Little torches. I had it before.
Oh, yeah.
the micro torch.
This little bottle thing here. Of course, we got big torches, but you can see this thing gets used. Has the little bottle, you can get them in Home Depot or whatever. You just give it a little, heat it up with some penetrating oil. In this case, Jerry, thank you, brake fluid. Okay, what's the next comment?
The other trick was Oh, let me
And
get-
by the way, we had to do that on here.
Yes, we
Because
did.
it wasn't opening it up.
From Bill, he said they stick a drill bit in the hole in the middle of the bleeder to stiffen it up, so when they put the wrench on it, it won't distort. It'll make it solid.
Ah,
That's a
Bill,
great idea.
I like that. Bill puts a drill bit in the middle of the bleeder, but I wonder if he changes it after that. Because what it's going to do is stiffen it up so it won't cave in. They do
Right.
cave.
Right.
And that's a
They're very
good tip.
soft.
Hopefully you can take that drill bit back out.
Yeah.
Well, you
what's
know-
the worst case? You're gonna replace the
Hold it.
bleeder?
Wagner has a whole thing of bleeders.
Yeah, we got no problem replacing
Yeah.
the bleeder.
I used to keep them in
That's a
stock.
great idea.
Yeah.
That's a
You
great
know?
idea. And
I like that.
I want to thank all you, just to this point, the interaction and comments is great. You guys keep it coming. That's what makes these
Yeah.
events so valuable, not just to the other folks who are watching, but to us. You know,
Hey, I didn't
always
think of the
learn
drill
something.
bit then.
That's good.
Thank you for the tip. I appreciate it. Anything else, Pierre, or we can move
Well,
on?
there's a bunch of questions and comments. One guy says, with 100,000 miles, he automatically recommends replacing all the hoses.
One of my customers would have the same thing as Guy's comment is 100,000 miles, recommend replacing all the hoses. I had a couple of engineers that were my customers, and they insisted that you replace every hose. We're not talking just the front hoses, the back hose, any hose on a car, and replace calipers or wheel cylinders or whatever. Everything he wanted replaced. He said 100,000 miles is a lot of stopping and a lot of wear and tear.
Sure, I can see that.
Another guy, Rob, said just a tip, don't overheat the caliper. I think we said that.
Yeah, that's
wanna-
correct.
very good point.
Don't
Don't wanna
overheat
damage
it. Yeah, by the way, if you overheat it, you're going to hear a poop, and smoke's going to come out with a little fire out of your brake hose. We've seen people
Spoken
do
to the
it.
man with
I've
personal
done it.
experience, right?
Oh yeah, believe me. When you have people work for you, you see a lot of things. Fire extinguisher is good to keep her out.
This is a little off the bleeder subject. Is there any special cleaner to remove brake differential fluid mixed with brake dust and brake fluid?
Off of
That's a good question. Off of what?
I guess he's talking about
okay,
linings.
we're talking about removing. I've always been. I guess the question is anything special to remove. What was it? Brake.
Differential fluid mixed
Differential
with
fluid
brake
sounds
dust
like
and
an
brake
axle
fluid.
So we have a rear axle seal, and you got it on the linings.
They're going
You know
bye-bye.
what? They're gone.
They're
They
gone.
got-
No.
Don't even risk it. Even cleaning the drum is not a good idea. If you put new shoes on, and
Yeah.
some people just spray brake clean, sand it a little bit,
Right.
you really want to machine those drums down. You can just take a couple of thousandths off, even them up on both sides,
Yeah.
and get rid of those brake shoes.
Which is the same way. It's like one of the reasons I like to wear gloves, because when I go to actually put everything back together again with the new friction material, on the discs, I don't want anything on those pads. I don't want any grease spots on the rotor. So I want to keep my hands clean from that. When I'm doing drums, I used to take masking tape and I'd wrap it around the friction material while I was installing it, and then right before I put the drum back on, that's when I would
Good idea.
remove the masking tape.
Yeah. See, I wouldn't really, I'm not a glove wearer, but I always have.
Especially lavender.
Especially lavender, I don't go that like that. That's a whole other ballgame. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Just doesn't suit me. At any rate, I would always clean my hands, with the shop rag, and/or if they were dirty to put them on, like I would not want to put pads on with my hands like this.
Right.
Because you will, and even the rotors.
Right.
And cleaning them down, we'll get to that part.
Right.
Cleaning the rotors down, very, very important.
So I guess we move on now to the next single biggest thing that you guys can do to eliminate your comebacks, and that's take proper care of the rotor. That is probably, according to several people I spoke to, the leading cause of brake noise and other issues.
Force stopping,
Force
pulsation.
stopping is improper finish, improper use, putting one on. that
Improper
did not
mounting.
expect. A lot of different things going on with it. So we're going to start off by taking some measurements. Come around here. I got my mic, and we're going to start off measuring the rotor at least 6 spots around.
Getting in there. Yeah, and someone had here, Bruno, put tape on the brake shoes to protect. That's what Pete did. Oh, and Jerry likes to grind down a piece of coat hanger to put inside the bleeder. Guess the same thing as a drill bit. The drill bits we have in our box, coat hanger, yeah, you should have them around. Pretty cool. Thank you.
And while I'm measuring the rotor, just guys, I'm coming in about halfway, right in the middle where all the pad wear is.
You could roll that over a little bit and you can get on the other side of it like this. You got wire.
And we're just going to do a few just to kind of give you an idea of what we're doing. Now, what am I measuring for here? How many of you guys are going to automatically say probably minimum thickness, right? Because I'm going to find out whether I can use this rotor again or not. And I'm also checking it for something called parallelism. In other words, what's the difference between the thickest and the thinnest part of the rotor? That's where your pedal pulsation is coming from. The spec on this one, I have the spec sheet printed out. But the maximum allowable variation is only 18 thousandths of a millimeter. That's 7 thousandths of an inch.
Yeah, that's
Excuse me,
peanuts.
7 thousandths of an inch.
And we got a good comment here. This guy Mark says, we had a Volkswagen Jetta diesel at a brake shutter, and a guy had it to another shop, and then they replaced everything. Still had a problem, and they replaced the bushings in the lower control arm, and it stopped. It stopped having your ears probably. And have we heard anything like that? And that's what he.
Well, I tell you what I have found out. You know the BMWs with that big bushing in the back end of their control arm.
Yes.
They go bad.
Oh.
And you hit the brakes, they
You're
give you
gonna
the
hear
same
it.
thing as a pedal pulsation.
No
which you
doubt.
think is a pedal pulsation, and it's not. Okay, so there's a couple of things that that can result in that, and it goes all with checking all possible causes, right? So we're going to do this all the way around, and for the interest of time, I'm not going to complete all the steps. But what we're going to do is we're measuring the rotor, at least 6 to 8 spots around the circumference of the rotor. And then you can take the largest measurement from the smallest. That's your thickness variation. That's got to be within spec. If it's more than that, odds are you've got a pulsation in the pedal, and if not, you're going to very soon. Now, why? When you have a variation in the thickness and the pads are at rest, the pad's going to come into contact with those thicker sections as the rotor turns. So instead of having a nice, even parallel surface, you start to get a nice, uneven parallel surface. And your pads are trying to follow that. It's like trying to follow hills and valleys. And that's what ends up causing that pulsation in the pedal. So once we've done that and we determined that what the thickness variation is, we also, of course, have the number for minimum thickness.
Correct.
Is this serviceable? And again, according to the spec sheet, the minimum thickness value for this one, you can find her here, Betty.
And what he's looking that up, we had someone on there say they take nuts without these caps on it and they put the flat side down. Yeah, that's something
Yes.
that you do for years. But everyone that has these acorn type of nuts or cap type nuts,
Now,
well, you're gonna have to put a washer behind them.
I have a suggestion. You can't use lug bolts necessarily on like Euro cars with bolts, but the old flywheel bolts were the same thread and diameter but shorter. I kept a bunch of flywheel bolts and head bolt washers to hold the discs down.
So there's a
Okay,
tip
that's a
from
great tip for any of the bureaus that are using the studs instead of lug nuts.
right. So no lug nuts. You got to put the stud in.
You just use the
Flywheel bolts.
On a BMW, flywheel bolts, but with the washers from head bolts.
Yeah, and head bolt washers.
Yeah, because head bolt washers are nice and thick.
Okay, awesome. So we have the minimum thickness. We compare that to spec. The spec for this vehicle is 26 millimeters.
Right.
And we're well above that, so I'm not worried about that. I got all kinds of room to resurface it in that regard. But that does bring up an interesting point. When you go to that little book by your brake lathe and you have all the specifications, you see a few, don't you? You got
Yes.
minimum thickness, and then a lot of folks list a discard spec,
Correct.
and some list a machine to spec. Okay? And it's interesting, but machine to actually can be 3 different definitions. You see the little asterisk in the book, right? And you guys know what I'm talking about. You see the asterisk
Yeah.
in the book, you got to look at that. You got to go down to the bottom of the page to see what that particular manufacturer is using machine to define.
Correct.
Okay. Very bottom, we don't go belong if it has a minimum thickness spec, or if there's a spec on the rotor for minimum thickness that you can still read. Use that as your bottom line.
Right.
But
And-
typically, machine to means you can machine it to that point and not beyond.
And
Okay.
another tip if we have, let's say the rotor on the other side has grooves in it, machine that one first. And you would like to try to get these as close as possible. If you took 20 thousandths off that side, you really should take 20 off this. Because having them uneven, especially when you heat the brakes up, you're going to run into an issue.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that's what I always did to make sure they were always even. You know, of course, if you have one that's way far down, you know, then you should recommend a replacement. It's like, you know, shoes. When you put your shoes on, I bet you guys have 2 new shoes on or 2 old shoes. You're not going to put one new, one old. But over the years, people have come in and said, hey, could you just do this or that? And of course, no. Question? Yeah.
One is a comment. Rob has run into suspension parts, not just those bushings. Shocks, struts, ball joints, especially on VWs and Audis, that mimic pulsations from brakes.
Yes, and that's why it's always good. So Rob said he has bushings and ball joints and other front end components that actually mimics a pulsation from brakes. Yes, you know, when we do a brake job, being a professional, we should check everything. Make sure everything is tight. And Pete said that right in the beginning. So a good tip. Anything else, Pierre, while we're waiting?
One was a question. A question was, does your rotor mic have a point on one side?
Does the rotor mic have a point on one side?
Does your rotor mic have a point on one side? No, the one that we're using, both anvils are flat, and that's okay, but ideally, yes, a true brake micrometer does have an anvil with a point. Not too concerned about on this particular one. I don't have any real big grooving or scarring or anything like that to interfere with that decision. And if I did and I didn't have access to that type of mic, as soon as I have a cleanup cut, I'm going to measure it again.
Right.
Okay.
No doubt.
There was one other question. How about checking taper? And how does that affect brake operation?
Taper, I think you may be thinking of what we just described as thickness variation. It's also called parallelism. Any variation in thickness from one point to another on the rotor
is just like taper. So just like taper of a cylinder, this is parallelism on a rotor. Very similar. Another question, Pierre?
Another suggestion, actually, use acorn style or bolt styles that have stud installer from a stud installer set to hold the discs down.
Use acorn style, yeah. You know, by the way, acorn style or stud style of the Pro Cut machine has a bunch of that stuff right in there. So when you're machining a rotor, it's actually done correctly. Okay.
Okay, what we're doing, guys, we're setting up our dial indicator because that's going to be the next step. And I apologize, we could have probably done that a little sooner.
Oh, yeah.
But
we like
that's all
giving
right.
Pete extra work. It's something with those purple gloves. I don't know.
yeah, some of that, yeah, something like that. Is that on there? One more. Well, that was a good spot.
So while Pete is clipping this on, and by the way, you know, we do a lot of different brake jobs here, and before, you know, some rotors can be saved and cut. Before we cut any of them on a car, we check them, just like we were doing here, and especially for something being out around.
There's a comment that, and I didn't catch his name, I already went past it,
I don't
but
know.
his mentor taught him to always do things like that in pairs. Brakes, anything like that.
Do everything like that in pairs, exactly what I said before. Very good. We really appreciate your comments, guys. So, you know, Pierre, some of your experience on run out on a BMW. Now, you know, some people will put these things on with 6,000ths. That's a hell of a lot of run.
BMW's spec was 20/100ths of a millimeter, and my personal spec was 2/100ths of a millimeter, was what I wanted on a new installation.
So if something was good, it was 2/100ths of a millimeter.
Right.
So we're talking, you know, and you got to be careful. You know, when people bring you your brake rotors in and they drop them on the floor,
They're done.
you're probably going to have an issue with that. You know, I used to tell the guys, make sure you place my stuff down, and if I see you throw it in the truck when I happen to be passing by, I'm not buying brakes from you. Because a lot of times we assume when something's new, it's good. It really doesn't take that long to set something up and check it out. So Pete's just about done here. He's okay. This thing makes it better. It's making some. And then should be able to go.
Okay, now, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna check the run out. Okay, what is the max in and out of the rotor? And you might ask yourself, well, if I'm gonna service this rotor, why do I wanna do that now? What do I care? Okay, now, if I'm trying to diagnose the situation, that might be one reason, but the other is, how many of you guys are still using off-car brake plates?
Oh, there's a lot of them out there.
There sure is.
And is the arbor piece good? Is the cone
And how
good?
do you know?
How do you know?
How do you know? If I can determine where the high spot is in relation to the rotor pad, and I go to put it on my off-car brake lathe and then check it on the lathe, it should be pretty darn close to in the same spot,
I agree.
right?
I
So-
agree. And that's where you mark them. It's a good setup. And by the way, when you're checking it here, that hub should be nice and clean. You should have that roted down tight. Very, very important. So Pete is going around with it. I was going to do this for him, but he likes working.
I'm a hands-on kind of guy.
And what the hell? Might as well let him do it.
And, oh, I still have my pin in my pocket. Okay, so I can mark the high spot.
So he likes drawing. This is not a Mr. Rogers class, by the way. Yeah, but
And now I have that mark. Okay? So we got that part taken care of. Now, if it's excessive like this one is, the next thing I probably want to go ahead and do is take the rotor off, clean everything up. Okay? Let's take a look at that.
Because remember, we torqued these studs down. All of these studs were torqued down, I think, to 40
foot-pounds.
40 foot-pounds.
I'm going to cheat. It's very evident set.
You could have done it with that gun too.
Oh, that's right. You look like a monster.
That Ingersoll monster gun, man, that thing kicks butt.
I'm just gonna.
There were two questions in the meantime.
Go ahead, while he's waiting.
One, related to this, is do you have to torque those lugs to spec, or can you just hand tighten them with a ratchet?
So, question was, do you just torque those lugs to spec, or do you hand tighten it with a ratchet? We torqued them not to the spec of about 100 or 110 when you're putting a wheel on, but to 40 foot-pounds.
40 foot pounds.
And by the way, this is the same thing with the Pro Cut. They tell you the exact thing when you're using that machine to machine a rotor, that they want those things torqued down or you will run into a problem. Want me to pull it out? Rust it.
There was another question. Do you think it's better to use a clamp-on style or a magnet style dial indicator?
I tell you what, the question is, should you use a magnet base or a clamp-on base? I think you're going to have to go with a clamp-on base on these because you're just going to too hard time trying to find something that's going to hold that magnetically under there, especially with the rust.
There's a lot of them out there. The dial indicator is essential. This one here is sometimes a little bit as it gets old. I mean, every few years, this thing kind of gets beaten up. It basically, you can see it gets limp, and then you can play with the tightening game here. But I would say you're better off with a clamp one as well, because magnet, you can't always put a magnet anywhere. So, just my opinion, I would agree with Pete on that.
Now, back to the dial indicator. It was excessive, and here could be one reason why. Notice the condition of this face and inside.
Yeah, look at the hat.
This is not going to sit flush against one another. Okay, we're talking a tolerance, a maximum tolerance, I think it's like 4,000ths of an
4,000ths of
inch,
an inch.
measured at the outside of the rotor. So anything that happens here in the hub, well, look at the spacing. Okay, if the hub, say the hub is stopping here, that's only about halfway from the center to the outside. So if I have a little bit here, it's going to double by the time it gets to the outside
no
out.
doubt.
This is one of the areas where you can set yourself up for a problem with pulsation down the road, even if you take everything else the way you should.
Could have the best brand new rotors.
You don't have that lateral run out under control before you ship it down the road. So,
And here's where we can use the little whizzer gun. I think you have that
a
somewhere.
wizard gun somewhere.
Right? Do you have the whizzer
I
gun?
do. I just
You want to put that rotor down before you have no toes left? Give it a minute, drop it.
I got it.
Okay. I wasn't grabbing for anything.
Got a little whiz wheel, so we can clean that up.
And good idea to wear safety goggles.
Well, and we'll continue that in the interest of time.
Yeah. And then we want to do the same thing there. They have some of these things sometimes for cleanup. They have this one great thing I used to have that goes on and does a good thing for studs. It also does a great job on cleaning this whole area up. Oh, you may have a picture of it.
Picture of that. Do I? No,
I know they sell them now a lot easier to get than years back.
You want me to zoom in on that?
No.
No, we thought we had it.
But your tool truck, he's got them.
Yeah.
They're just little
check with your
roll-off
mobile guys.
tubes that go to your die grinder, and you can just right over top the stud, and you can. I mean, you can still do it, this way. But take less.
Yeah, safety. I got to get out of the picture. I'm not safe. Now, sometimes that's the beauty of using these, so that the beauty of using these, sometimes with these things, like there's caution on using that on a cylinder, you can take off metal that you don't realize you're taking off and make that surface uneven. So Pete is he's taking care on doing this. Some people get into it real hard, they're going to run into a problem. Again, these are usually 3M, and then there's the 3M. I used to keep these in stock all the time. They work real well.
Guys, I know a lot of things. I said, boy, that sure is a lot of time and effort. I got weird looks when I was in the shop and I was doing this, but people weren't coming back complaining about my brake work. That's just, you either have some pride in what you do or you don't.
Exactly.
You either want to do it right or you don't.
Right.
And
I'd rather do it only once.
Sure, and I want my
you get paid the
customers,
second
because
time.
maybe they got to the $59.95 guy or the $99.95 guy that I had, and like you said, their customers didn't get away with that either. So they're already disgruntled. They already put us in the same boat.
Right.
You take the time to explain what you're going to do and show them what you're going to do, and you put yourself in a whole different boat.
No doubt. Be a pro. That's the name of the game. Go ahead, Pierre. Question?
2 questions. One is, how about a needle scaler?
A needle scaler.
Okay, I admit. The question was, how about a needle scaler?
How about
I'm
a
not
needle
sure what you're referencing there.
A needle scaler, you'll have to repeat this. A needle scaler is a tool they use like on welding to break the slag off of after they weld something. I think it would probably peen the metal. I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. This needle scaler, is something like with welding, and if you use it to break the rust off, it may not work. It may pit something. So, again, if something works for you and you feel comfortable, I have not used that, so I can't really comment.
The other question was, what type of disc is that you're using?
It's a roll-lock disc.
That's a roll-lock
It's the
disc.
brown roll-lock disc. The tool trucks sell them by the boxfuls.
Yeah, we usually buy the 3M 50 in a box, I think they
Yeah.
come in, 50 or 100 in a box.
Yeah, and they work really well.
Very good. But again, don't use that on cylinder head type stuff, but for
Right.
cleaning up some metal surface,
Right.
pretty good. And again, be careful digging in. If you lay into it, it will take a lot off. I like the other one better, the 3M, the finger one does a great job.
Yeah. All I did, so I just for the sake of time, I just cleaned up the outer circumference of this hub, because one of the things you need to check is the condition of that hub. Now, if you were looking at our Timken webcast, you learned how to do the taper bearings, right?
That's right.
And if
the
you
Timken
didn't,
webcast.
it's on YouTube. It's at the Auto Pro Workshop. It's on the TST YouTube channel.
Yep.
So it's not hard to find.
It's there.
We also have a lot of information on hubs. So I got the dial indicator set up. What I'm going to do, I'm going to check the end plate of the bearing. So I'm going to push in on it, and I'm going to pull out on it, and I'm going to look for any indication of movement on the dial indicator. Okay, any more than I believe the spec on that is like 4,000, so
4,000.
the bad hub bearing needs to be replaced. Now, remember that excessive run out that we had? Is it because there's a problem with that hub flange? What if the wheels weren't torqued properly?
Yeah.
What if there was an impact that we don't know about? where's that cost coming from? So we're going to run this again, looking for the highs and lows.
So he's rotating this around, looking for the high spot.
While he's doing that, we had a comment that one of the guys thought it was a good idea to turn the discs after with any pad replacement, no matter what, new surface.
New surface, oh, okay. Surfacing the disc with any pad replacement was a comment. I would agree, you know, pad slapping, to me, that's some of your cheap stuff that's done out there. If the surface is not totally even, the pads will wear uneven, squeaks will develop, and your stopping distance will not be as good.
Well, you know, GM actually issued a bulletin about a decade ago, saying that if you don't have damage, all the measurements, all the measurements are okay, that you could just keep right on going. And I've done it. But does that mean it's worked? I mean, it might have worked once. Doesn't mean it's always going to work. The benefit from resurfacing the rotor is you have a nice clean surface to lay down that layer of friction material that we're going to talk about as the last step of your brake job. That again will help prevent issues with noise.
Right. And I think with the GM thing, they had a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Their on-car brake laid, because a lot of these cars started going front-wheel drive when he issued this out. The units they were originally using were not up to par.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember one tool I had years back for the ones where the rotors wouldn't come off on Hondas, Subarus, bearings. This quick cut would go on there. It'd be something, you know, to drive the car. It really didn't do a great job, you know, but that was better than not cutting them.
Right.
But it wasn't really good. So I think GM had a lot of problems where either brake blades, bench brake blades were issues that we mentioned before, people not putting everything on correctly, and some of the poor quality brake on car machines that they had.
And as far as resurfacing a brand new rotor, again, it really depends on. There's two split schools of thought on that one. If you're using white box stuff, you're going to have to. If you're using a quality product, no, probably not. The final judge is when you install a rotor, you do the run-out checks like we've been demonstrating. It fits in spec.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you another thing about I got to pick this rotor up to kind of show you. We had done something with the Pro Cut a while back, and we weighed rotors, OE rotors, regular rotors. When we look at the thickness from here to there, well, cheap companies, white box, you know what they do? You have the same thickness as far as overall, right. But what they do is this is a lot thinner, this part of the rotor, they put bigger spaces in between.
Yeah.
The weight is drastically different. When it's drastically different, you get what you pay for.
Right.
Use a name brand and a good piece of...
That was something that came up from more than one source while we were putting this together, that this is, globally, an industry-known issue that these knockoff products, you know, they look visually the same, but like you just pointed out, the working metal, if you will, is only enough to last maybe one life cycle.
That's right.
And you're not going to get a second one out of it. You know,
and
a good rotor, you'll get 1, 2, maybe even 3. You know.
Exactly. Now here's an issue. Just yesterday here in the New York area, New York City taxi cab industry, the FBI did a raid, and the raid was on counterfeit parts that they were putting in. Parts that looked like they were a major brand, like Motorcraft or whatever, because this is a lot of Ford taxis. And meanwhile, they found that these parts were substandard parts, you know, and they were paying big prices for them. And someone's life is on the line because this taxi cab is driving all over New York City.
And
so
even if
be careful out there.
And everything does measure the same. You can't see the metallurgy.
No.
You know, so again, like you pointed out, you've heard us say it a million times, you get what you pay for.
Exactly.
Stick with the name, quality part, manufacturer that you know. There are plenty of them out there.
Oh,
of course, our sponsor's one of them.
Oh,
you know.
without a doubt.
So,
Flag is a big name.
So that's one way to go. Now, back to the run out, we checked the hub. Guess what? The hub's great. So there's no problem with excessive run out or play. That's not the problem. Where did all that run out in the rotor come from? I'm going to bet it was all the rust. So we're gonna clean that up, and we're gonna check it again when we put this vehicle back together again. But before we proceed, of course, now the next step would be putting our parts list together. What do we need? You know, we know we've gone through the caliper. We got a torn boot on this one. I'm kind of leaning towards recommending some reman calipers for this customer.
No doubt.
But if that was okay, we're going to take a look at the caliper hardware. At the very least, we're going to replace the pad guides so that they're able to move smoothly. Now, these are pretty nasty looking. So, and a lot of the quality pads now are coming with that as part of the package.
That's true, and that's
So you
something
don't
for
have
us
to
to show them.
Well, we can do
You know, I used to stock a whole bunch of different shims and they stick on things, and there was even a couple of companies like BG that would have different stuff to go on a pad. But now, take a peek at these thermoquiets, and while he's opening the box.
There was a question from Kenneth. Do you have any comments on the Break Align, A-L-I-N-E product? I don't know that.
Yes, that's a great question.
Break Align.
Who was the gentleman again?
Kenneth.
Kenneth is asking about a product called Break-A-Line. If you do a Google search on it, what the Break-A-Line is, it's a shim system to correct runout that you're not correcting.
Yes. At
Okay.
first, it didn't ring a bell in my brain.
And I talked to Rick Kearns. Rick, if you're watching, hey! He's one of the senior technical trainers for Wagner braking products. And they do these, I mean, they're doing dozens and dozens and dozens of brake jobs as part of their training curriculum. And not once has he had the need to shim a rotor to correct the runout if everything else is done properly.
Right.
If there's too much on the hub,
Right.
the hub bearing's no good.
Exactly. You need to
And
replace it.
Putting a shim is just going to mask that.
Exactly.
If it's dirty,
You need.
putting a shim on it is just masking the problem. That's
You
no
need
good.
to clean it.
If you're using a cheap rotor, then you got what you paid for it.
Exactly.
But to answer the question, yes, there is a product out there. It's kind of like if you ever done a rear camber caster shim adjustment, same idea.
Right. That's
Same
what
idea.
that is.
You measure
Very
the
true.
total runout. It tells you clock your shim here, and it corrects it. So, but again, from Rick's experience, has never seen the need
Wow,
to
to
have
do it.
to do that.
Very good. And here's some of
Didn't
the
think I was going to
hardware.
know that, did you?
I didn't, because at first, as soon as you started mentioning that, it dawned on me, I read that in the magazine. They come up. That's what pictures are pretty good, and do a little reading in the meantime. So we got some good clips here. You need to show them now the
I got
backs
some
of the
big
pads.
clap here in the pads.
Yeah, I'll hold the box.
Hold the box.
I'll be your Vanna White for that.
And see if we can pop this open so you can see better.
Here, I'm going to let you knife yourself. That's a Pierre knife.
A Pierre knife. Pierre's knife needs to be sharpened.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you go through Staples with it.
Oh.
While you're opening that, John asks, if you machine a new rotor, how can you sell it as new?
You machine a new roller, how can you sell it as new? Well, what you're doing is balancing the rotor, number one, and making the surface the correct level.
Well, again,
Or the correct-
you take the rotor and you buy it, and this has happened to me so many times I can't begin to count. Cheap rotor, and guys, I didn't own my own shop. I always worked for somebody else, so I got to try to say what I could say, but didn't always get hurt.
Sure.
And I understand if you're running a business, it's all about making a profit. I get that part. You can.
But it's a good way to lose a customer.
The $59.95 guy down the street, I understand that too. But if you get that white box rotor on and you measure the runout and it's excessive, what are you going to do?
Yeah, we have this guy going down the road having an issue.
If you measure the parallelism like we showed you and it's out of spec, what are you going to do? You don't have any choice. Or you send it back to the parts house.
And you get one that's worse.
Yeah, or you buy the quality rotor. And if you get a quality part, odds are no, you don't have to. You put it, the finish is where you need it to be. You put it on the car, you verify the runout's okay, and you're done.
Yeah.
We're going to do a little bit more outdoors here, but since G brought up the pads, of course, these are the Wagner NXT, the ceramic pads, the new thermoquiet pads. And one thing that I didn't know that I found very interesting, some pads have shims on the back.
Right.
And it can be tempting if you don't. It's funny how often that these little pieces of paper just get tossed
People
in the
read that?
trash.
RTFB? Nah, throw it out now. You should read it, by the way.
But they're in there for a reason. The shims that you had on the old pads don't necessarily go on the new ones.
Ah,
Right,
that's,
so that's
another
one.
mistake that people make.
And I was always a fan of putting a little high temp silicone on the backing not only on the outer pad, but the inner pad as well. So that helps dampen the noise and kept it quiet. But you know what? You can't do that on these. You see these little raised areas here? And forgive me, all the Wagner folks watching, if I can't quite get it out, because it's kind of
Tough work.
tough. It's a bunch of tongue twisters.
Lucky he didn't tell me.
Integrally molded insulator, or IMI. That's what they call these here. And if you, I mean, it looks the same, right, as the rest of the backing.
Yeah, it does.
But it's not. These sections are actually almost similar to the friction compound.
Wow.
It's an organic compound, and this actually acts as the shim.
And then they coated all that.
It's coated, but it specifically tells you do not use any type of lubricant here, because you can degrade that material and
then you'll get a
defeat
noise.
the purpose, and you create a problem that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, and then of course, just to kind of demonstrate, this is not quite as drastic as some of the NXT pads that I'm sure you've seen with the chamfered edges and cutting.
Keeps the noise down.
Yeah, I mean, these guys take this seriously. I mean, they have these things, and Mr. Mernon, if I get this wrong, the laser refractometer, it's
Refractometer?
dude, they spin these things up, they get hot, and they analyze exactly what's hitting what and where. And then that's what you see the cuts there for, so it's to maximize the pad content. And no, guys, this is not a commercial for, Wagner.
Yeah, and a lot of cheap pads, these are all square and high. And, I also worked, besides running my own shop for years, I worked for someone, and they would have cheap pads like that, and we would have to sand them down to keep the noise down.
Yeah, and
But here to do it for you.
they
made that
I guess the point I want to stress, not just Wagner, but the big boys, the big brake players. They make products not only for the aftermarket, but they make them for the OEs. They work directly with the OEs. They know what this vehicle needs to stop. So anything that's got their name on the box is going to perform to at least that level.
No doubt.
If not better.
Now, some of the question that's usually asked is, how do they break the brakes in? Braking, driving, or stopping, we should say, in this case. A lot of people have different methods. Doing 60 miles an hour and jamming the brakes on. Probably not a good idea.
Well, it's kind of a little ahead. I'll go ahead and we'll talk about that now since you brought it up. But again, that is one of the most commonly missed items on the checklist. Once you're all done and the brakes are back on the car, you do have to break them in before you turn it over to the customer. The purpose of the break-in is to apply a thin layer of that friction material on that new rotor surface to match them together, okay, without overheating the pads, creating those hot spots that later become squeals. It's like anything else on the car.
Sure.
You have to break it in. Wagner recommends the 20-30-30. And I've heard some other companies like to go even 30-30-30. And then, to me, that's probably the easiest to remember.
Right.
At least 20 stops, complete stops, from 30 miles an hour to nothing. And gentle, moderate stopping. Not hard stops and not long, drawn-out, slow crawling stops. Right.
So you don't overheat them.
Yeah, so you don't overheat them. Wait 30 seconds and repeat the process. So you're going to do that at least 20 times. 30 miles an hour to nothing, 30-second wait in between. Or you can go from 50 miles an hour to 20, but I know in my test drive days, that's a hard place to find to do that. It wasn't too hard to go to the neighborhood and do the 30 to nothing, And then, even then, you want to recommend, in fact, I got a slide on that. I think we'll share that now. We'll get,
There you go.
So here's the procedure. Wagner recommends the 20-30-30 rule. Other companies say 30-30. I think that's the easiest to remember. 20 complete stops, 30 miles an hour to nothing, or 20 slowdowns from 50 to 20. Light to moderate pressure. Don't panic stop. 30 seconds between applications so you get the pads to cool down. And then tell your customer, you're not quite done yet. Tell them they need to do 1 or 2 days of normal driving, normal stopping, to avoid those panic stops, avoid those, you see grandma with her foot on the brake pedal?
Oh, yeah.
While she's driving? Okay, you don't do that with a new set of brake pads. That's gonna cause you to come back and have some issues, okay? So does that answer the questions about the burnishing?
So, we're getting close to our time here.
Oh, then we ought to cover the one last thing here. Let me get this out. Be right back.
you know, we just love your questions and comments. I have so much to share with you. But of course, we know you have to work tomorrow as well.
So here's a new rotor, you know, for this application. I'm just going to let it hang here so I don't have to hold on to it. We're just going to let it sit there for a moment. But I want you to look at the finish. Let's talk about we said we're going to resurface the rotor that we have on the car. If you're on an off-car brake lathe, make sure you follow the recommended procedures by that lathe manufacturer. Rough cuts up to maybe 6/1000ths.
Yeah, depending on your machine.
Depending on the machine.
And make sure your tips are good.
Yes. Make sure you verify the high spots in the same place. I've seen a lot of adapters damaged, dropped on the floor, dinged up. That can throw that off.
And also look on the rotor for a lot of hot spots where it looks like the material, the metal has, your tip is just going to jump over it. If it skips over it, you're never going to get that rotor.
Well, that's good. That's a good point. You go back to your visual inspection. If you see those little blue dots, if you see hairline cracks, then it's gone.
It's gone.
The rotor's got to go away.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that, again, is hot. You know, running too hot for whatever reason. On the car lathe, follow the manufacturer's directions. Okay. The whole goal, though, is you want to get a good RA finish. I think the spec is like 5 to 74, and that's a roughness average RA finish. Okay. Now, why do we want it smooth like that? Well, that's so that we can get a nice, even, thin layer of that friction material embedded on the rotor. If it's too rough, and that's one of the leading causes, again, of noise complaints, is that the rotor finish is too rough. Guys, just take it off the brake lathe, throw it back on the car. Well, think about that for a minute. You watch that lathe turn, and it's like a record needle.
Exactly.
It's one long, thin strand being removed from that. And just like a record, it's got really sharp hills and valleys. So follow procedures from your machine, but the very last thing you should do, get a sanding block and some 120 to 150 grit paper. Hold it on the surface of the rotor for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes per side. That's going to take and knock down all those hills and valleys, give you a much smoother finish. If you can run your fingernail across the surface and it catches, that's too rough.
Way too rough.
You know, if you can't write on it, I mean, we used to try to write on it with a ballpoint pen, you know, and if you could do that, it was probably okay, but if you couldn't, it was too rough. If there's one thing you can do, that's one of the steps you need to take.
No doubt.
And the next one, again, often overlooked, is how to clean the rotor when you're done.
Pete, you know, you just took the words out of my mouth. Because I would say most people do it wrong. And we're going to probably have people out there who get mad at us when we say what we're going to say.
One of the best solvents that you can use is good old hot soapy water.
Just like doing an engine.
Yep.
Right? You're not putting brake clean in an engine.
Nope.
And there is a reason for it.
It is. And I thought, and it was very interesting when I learned exactly what the reason for not using the aerosol cleaners. You know, in the yellow have we've done it, brake clean, spray it on there, and you go
clean
on.
the pads down.
That's okay if you got like a grease spot or something
Right.
and it's a finished surface. But if you want to clean the machining debris out, here's what happens. The propellant in the aerosol is a refrigerant.
Sure.
And it's cold. And it will actually cause those grooves to lock down on the debris. Freeze it to the surface, and then once you got the rotor installed, rotor heats up a little bit. Now guess where they all went? They went right into your pad, and that's
why sometimes you see little bumps and valleys in the pads and stuff gets stuck in
and
it.
noise
And
noise. Okay.
So get yourself a good bottle, spray bottle, and warm water.
Oh, I like a good tank. Give me a good, like you wash the dishes in, hot soapy water, and hot. Because the heat's the key. The heat opens up those screws.
I used to have one of those Clayton
out.
washer things that had a heater on it.
Yeah.
And it was a water base.
Yeah.
And it was just for brakes.
Those stiff bristle brush.
Yep,
Get
stiff brush.
in there and clean that rotor off with hot soapy water. Even in a new one, if you got the protectant that comes.
You got to get the protectant.
Same thing. Good hot soapy water is all you need to get that clean.
A lot of people, that's another problem. They put it with the protectant on there, and now it's going to start getting into the brake pad and the brake material, and it's not going to be good. So make sure you clean them up.
Okay,
now, with about 10 minutes left that we have,
just to wrap up, because we've got the rotor clean now, we got it serviced, we got new pads ready, we've got the caliper serviced, the rotor's going to be installed, caliper is installed, we're going to torque the caliper mounting bolts to spec.
No doubt.
We're going to lubricate the caliper sliding pins, with that high temp silicone. or the moly lube that we showed you. We're going to take a wire brush anywhere there's a contact sliding surface between the mount and the caliper assembly.
Make
We're
sure
going
you
to clean that up with the wire brush. We're going to apply a light coating lubricant there. And then of course we'll put the wheel back on. Well, before we put the wheel back on, we'll check one more run out check on the rotor to make sure that's okay. If that's under 4 thousandths, excuse me, 4 thousandths? I think 4 thousandths is the limit.
On this one, 3-4 thousandths.
Okay. Yeah, no more than.
Yeah.
Then we're going to go ahead and put the wheel on and torque the wheel, back down to spec.
Oh, not use the air gun
Oh, no.
forever.
No, torque the wheel back to spec.
You
And
all know
guys,
that
in the
already.
future, when you're taking the wheel off, let's say that later on, and maybe if you didn't do the brake job, but if you are taking this apart to do other service, mark the rotor to the hub
Exactly, index.
so that you put it right back on the same way. If you're doing the rotor run out and you're a little off, then take it off, move it one, put it back on, check it again. Often just clocking it 1 or 2 lugs will
Just like a
bring
tire.
it right into spec. And then mark it so that if the guy before you did all that hard work to make sure the brakes were working right when he left his shop, or you did it when you left your shop, you want to make sure you put that back on the same way.
Correct.
2 people, Mira and Richard asked, do you suggest putting grease on the hub before you put the disc in place?
Do you recommend putting grease on the hub before putting the disc in place?
It is not a bad idea right here to put a light lubricant.
Usually
Okay.
anti-seize.
That works, yeah, anti-seize works, the same
If
high
it-
temp
if it's
silicone would
clean.
be okay. Anything there, okay, I know what you're getting at. These things
It's
can really lock on there.
Now, I'd like to make a suggestion. I've used for years a very thin spray on that hub, that clean hub, to make sure it won't corrode, and the inside of the hat as well. I have a particular brand. I like the BG battery terminal clear spray, clear, very thin, just a molecule, and then it
does
don't
keep
rust.
the rust off, the BG stuff,
Okay.
that clear
So Pierre
spray.
in the background, I mean, he has a wealth of European experience, very well versed in that field. He likes to use, what'd you say, it's a BG, battery,
clear battery terminal seal,
clear terminal protector.
sealer, right.
Sealer. And so a light coating on the inside of the rotor right here and right here in the hub to help minimize what you guys saw when we pulled the disc off. Oh, that's a great idea.
Anything else before we
That's
give
it
the
for now.
thank yous? And well, we appreciate you guys hanging in there with us. We know your time is very valuable, and we like to give you all the information that's possibly in the amount of time I guess we have. that we
Yeah,
can possibly do.
you and I were talking earlier, we knew it was going to take no time to fill this.
Yeah, especially when you start taking stuff apart. And you could always, either email us or contact us. Our information is available, and that way you could ask your questions and we can get back to you.
All right, now I want to get us over here on the
So we're going to get on to the screen.
welcome screen.
Get there, I'll get you.
So again, as we kind of wrap things up for this evening, I want to thank everybody again for coming out. We have, try to make this very quick. This is our 3rd year offering these technical webcasts with the help of the guys here at TSTG and the rest. I don't think I made any secret of the fact that these guys, they're not compensated in any way. We're here in his son's shop up here in Mayo Pacific, New York. He's not making any money off of this. We're not here for that. We're here to try to do what we can to help you. That's like it says on the cover of our magazine, advancing the automotive service professional. So I hope you feel that that's what we're helping to accomplish here. We have a lot of good stuff coming up for you this year. I don't think even G knows yet. We've been doing about 12 webinars a year, actually, because we do some on management and we do some on other content. We have a collision repair magazine that they offer help to. But the demand and the response has been so overwhelming. We're doing 23
Wow.
this year. Your buddy, Wayne Colonna.
Our buddy, that's it, Wayne
is with us
Colonna.
now. He's got 4 coming up, and he's a transmission guru. But you know what, guys? As a general tech, drivability tech, there's a lot I can learn from that guy.
Oh,
so
no
those
doubt.
opportunities are coming up. You can find out about it all in the short run by signing up for the Technicians newsletter at motorage.com/techs. Okay, so that's my spot. Now it's time for G spot.
Wait
a minute. Oops, sorry. No intention there.
We have our technician service training, TST, technician, big event, March 23rd, the Ramada Inn in Fishkill, New York. Well, you say it's too far away, you don't want to fly into lovely, cold New York. Well, guess what? By the way, the Hudson Valley is really nice. You're about 90 minutes or less from downtown World Trade Center area. But you could see the simulcast, and Pete will be our keynote speaker with John Thornton doing some stuff on GDI, and Dave DeCourcy doing stuff on misfire and transducers. So check us out at tstseminars.org. You can sign up online and or come see us in person.
Yeah, guys. I mean, just to come see John Thornton and Dave DeCourcy. You know, if you're in this area, that's a great training opportunity. And I tell you something, been marveled at the big events that I've attended. That's the only training event where I've ever been to where you had the great odds of leaving with more than what you came with. You know, a lot of companies have been working with TSD for a long time, and they're very supportive. And God, I saw you guys give away, I mean, power probes, scan tools, just all kinds of goodies. So
over $27,000 or so worth of stuff that we give away. Thanks to our great sponsors.
Good training, a lot of fun. You know, if you can make it, be there.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, we have to give one more prop to the sponsor. You know, Wagner Thermoquiet Brakes. If you want to find out more about them, and I don't know why it didn't show up here, but
their website.
The website is tqbrakepads.com. Okay, that's tqbrakepads.com to learn more about this particular product line. Of course, Federal-Mogul has a lot of resources online, not just for brakes, but training, information on fuel systems, chassis products. I mean, you name it, they do a little bit of everything.
They got good stuff.
Yeah,
and
a lot of help.
We thank them once again. And most of all, we want to thank you guys. And Pete, it's always a pleasure. Even with your purple gloves, I'll shake your hand.
Guys, thank you so much for coming. We'll see you back here in May.
Yeah, have a good night. Oh, it'll be warm then.
It'll be warm then.
Thank you again.